people coming on to watch you, Grace. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Hello.
No, it's cool. It's great.
Yes, I feel the love.
Yeah, there's a lot of support there. It's awesome.
Doesn't calm the nerves, but I feel the love.
Thank you, participants, for coming in and immediately muting yourselves and making sure your camera's off. We'll get started in a couple minutes. I really like wherever you're sitting, Miss Forbes.
Thank you.
That looks cool.
Yeah, my mom likes to she likes antiques and stuff, so they're both this one's actual stone, I'm pretty sure. And then this one's so. Oh, Mr. Alvarez, my parents wanted me to ask you. They're asking me 50 times if it was going to be recorded.
Thank you for reminding me.
Password, princess.
Oh yeah, check your email. Mr. Alvarez sent it. No, you check your email.
All right, thank you, participants. As you are coming in, remember, please mute yourself and turn off your cameras so all our focus can be on Miss Forbes. We'll give audience members about 2 more minutes before we get started.
Did you find it?
There's no password asking.
Mom, yes there is. He sent a Zoom link
Yeah.
and it has the password on there. Do you see it?
Enter ID 07. Is that it?
Screenshot it and send that, yeah.
All right, folks. Welcome to Miss Grace Forbes' Thesis Defense. My name is Mr. Alvarez. I was her thesis advisor. And the other 2 people on the panel, I would like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves.
I'm Mr. Narish. I was one of Grace's preceptorial leaders for Frankenstein.
And I'm Mr. Hoffman. I was Grace's auxiliary reader.
So it looks like several of you have been to some of these before. But just to remind you, as we're going to start with a 5 to 10 minute opening speech from Ms. Forbes, and then a 30 to 40 minute conversation held between Ms. Forbes and the panel that was just introduced. During that time, we ask that microphones stay muted and cameras stay off so that we can focus all our attention to Ms. Forbes. With the last 15 minutes or so, we will open up the floor to you all, so you have an opportunity to write your questions into the chat. Grace will have an opportunity to pick questions and answer them at her leisure. And then at the very end, we'll give about 5 minutes so you can all turn your cameras on, clap for Grace, celebrate her, before we end everything. Without further ado, let's kick it over to Ms. Forbes.
Thank you. Okay. Friends, family, faculty, and peers. I want to thank you all for being here today to support me on this adventure as I delve into talking about a topic I'm so very passionate about. Thank you to Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Narish for reading my paper and for participating on my panel. And a special thank you to Mr. Alvarez, my advisor, for helping me through this process, encouraging and making sure I knew that everything was going to be okay along the way. But before I begin, I want to say 2 special thank yous that have been duly noted yet deserve the utmost praise. Firstly, I want to take a moment to thank my parents. Thank you both for being the guides of this walk on the path that I want to spend the rest of my life walking on, the path of service. You have taught me, as well as my siblings, to run along this path with everything that we had, embracing every single part of it along the way. You put love as the very steeple of our family, emphasizing that that love should be directed to others above ourselves, which means that living under your roof has always been an adventure, as I would wake up to a new person in the house because they needed a place to stay, or helping sort dozens of donations that had been dropped off over a fence in order to then be sold to raise money. Then, after that, gathering around 17 of the largest suitcases we could find, packing them up, making sure each weighed 50 pounds, and heading to Central America to drop it all off at the various homes you found to help out. Your example stemming from the embodiment of love that Jesus was in the Gospel of John. Mama, Dad, thank you for being those guides, those bright lights. The second thank you belongs to someone who steered and shaped me into becoming the person I am today. Even though you could not be here today, like we dreamed of since I came to ROT in 7th grade, thank you for showing me what it looks like to truly live well. My papa, thank you for being so in love with life that even to the point of cancer, taking away your ability to speak, to eat, to sing, and to sometimes breathe, you didn't let it take away your love. The love that you had that propelled you to still love with any and everything that you had. Despite the excruciating pain, discomfort, and agony you were in. Thank you for your example. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being my hero and for inspiring me to attempt to now replicate that love. This chosen path of service is not always easy to trek along. One has to rely on love to propel them forward. But you may wonder, what exactly is love? In reading my books, The Stoic Philosophy by Seneca, The Confessions by St. Augustine, and Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, with guest appearances from the Bible, I realized I had a great battle to fight ahead of me. And at that point, I didn't know if I was going to be the conqueror or the conquered. But I then examined philia, the affectionate love, the friendship love, which is valued above eros, the lust of love, because it is the love between equals. Agape, on the other hand, is the highest and most radical type of love, because it is selfless, unconditional, spiritual, and boundless in compassion. It also has infinite empathy, is free from desires and expectations, and loves regardless of flaws and shortcomings. The temporal human condition, better known as the love for earthly things, limit the scope of ultimate happiness because of the roots that grow and seep deep into the soil of the temporary and not the spiritual. How can something that has a definite end bring never-ending fulfillment, also known as joy, to the soul that is yearning for the attainment of the quenching of the fire that is within every human heart? The fire of fulfillment. Robert S. Jepson says, not just personal unhappiness, but all strife in life, including war, is the result of an overemphasis on temporary things. Money, power, and material possession. Temporary things will never fail to fail. So why do we seek out things that will only provide strife? We believe the lies that one believes that physical things will provide. Why do we fall for it? Like a moth to a flame, we fly full force into the trap that becomes our demise. How can anything that doesn't belong to the world of the eternal bring an aching heart the soothing it is yearning for? Is it then illogical to believe that it is impossible to love your neighbor without loving yourself first? The essence of love's core is selflessness and its unconditionality, signifying that it has nothing to do with a single person. Therefore, that love should then be directed not to oneself, but rather the love for the service for the betterment of mankind. In the jungle of society, your life is like a web of vines with many different lengths, colors, and patterns. This vine flourishes in certain conditions and decays in others. So then, why would we put the focus on things that are only going to decay and rot away, leaving us empty once again till we find something else to fill our void? Why do we not instead seek things that are good? Why do we not look for beauty instead of fixating on temporary bitterness? Look to do good for others instead of only loving yourself. Some, as seen in the writings of Seneca, say that if you don't love yourself first, then you are completely unable to love anyone else due to the preoccupation and the fixation of your problems, your wants, and your needs. After all, how can one adequately focus on the good of others when they have their own wants, their needs, and also need to be fulfilled? But in reality, this is the exact root of the problem. By seeking out the betterment of yourself first, the focus is solely on yourself. And let's face it, we're a never-ending cycle of problems that seem to arise daily, hourly, and possibly even by the minute. How then is one able to do good when only seeking to bring relief for themselves? The cure to a heart seeking fulfillment is to seek things that are everlasting, or infinite, meaning without an end. By loving and serving others, one is able to find fulfillment through the pursuit of the good, that then quenches that fire that's burning within them. By loving your neighbor, you are able to rest in the good done out of love and for the sake of the other person, therefore bringing you to an ultimate satisfaction that lies in the good, which is everlasting. After all, actions do speak louder than words. So now I ask, what bad can doing good for others bring? How can one do good if infatuated by themselves? I urge you, find service, find love, and find fulfillment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Forbes. You spoke a lot about self-love. You wrote a lot about self-love. I'm not 100% sure exactly what self is. So I recognize that someone like Victor in Frankenstein could have been infatuated. And I'm wondering really what self-love is and if there is something between not loving yourself at all and like loving yourself only.
Okay, can you expand on that just a little bit more?
Right.
Specify?
So I had a cup of coffee before coming to this defense because I wanted to be in absolute tip-top shape for this. And I'm wondering if that sort of self-love for myself will ultimately lead to my demise.
Okay, so I think that I think we need to learn how to use our words wisely. So I think the problem, the root of the problem, is calling that love. On page 1 and 2, I talk about philia, which is the friendship love, and agape, which, the Greeks have, 7 different types of love. But those two are, really important and, stood out to me the most, especially during writing this. So I think that by using agape and using philia, that, as the basis for what I'm talking about love, I think that's where we mess up. I think that you having your cup of coffee is an appreciation. I acknowledge that, we do, need to take care of ourselves. In the Bible it talks about how our body's a temple and, we need to glorify God. And, I don't think God created us to, not live well, or live and have pleasure with living. But I think that love, I don't think drinking coffee is love. I think it's more so appreciation and not, with not an emphasis on love, just emphasis on appreciation.
I'm curious when that appreciation for oneself drifts into selfish territory.
I think when it becomes all-consuming. So when looking at the lives of let's say Mother Teresa, I think that she needed to eat, she needed to drink, she I'm sure she enjoyed getting to play with the children and love her life. But I think again, when it comes all-consuming, when it becomes me first, I'm feeling this, so I'm going to make everybody around me feel this, or, certain things like that, it's like when you put, I talked about also, I forgot what page, the goggles. Page 10. I talked about the goggles and being able to see. So I said, just as goggles allow one to explore the beauty that lies underwater in the vast oceans. So upon receiving the Holy Spirit, like Augustine talked about, it's like a different perspective, which I think is very important and plays a key role in that, like differentiating that.
So, loving yourself is okay as long as there's room to love others.
No, it's having that, again, like talking about agape, that like selfless, unconditional love. I think it's dangerous when you have that for yourself, and I think that's the issue. I think it's the emphasis on like differentiating love and appreciation.
Can we, first of all, Ms. Worth, thank you for the speech. Can we approach our attitude towards ourselves with agape love? Is that possible?
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, can we approach, so I've just been writing down the components of agape love. I'm wondering, can we approach our attitude towards ourselves with unconditional goodwill and an attitude of, I'm going to care about this person, no matter what they do, they are still worth helping. Can we view ourselves that way?
Our way in the sense that, like, as we love and help other people, we love and help ourselves.
Yeah, just so, right? That ultimately, I'm a person, just like everybody else, that I am in some way taking care of or helping.
So I think that in the case of agape, no, because I think because it's so radical, it's also the love of God. I think that it's really scary comparing ourselves or trying to put ourselves on a level that is divine. So I think if anything, it would be like in like relation to like emphasis on appreciation. I think it would be more related to philia, which is the friendship, sort of having a friendship with yourself, but not like as powerful as agape.
I think I'm curious then, why is it permissible or the right thing to do to adopt an attitude of agape towards others if it is dangerous to assume a godlike role towards ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that brings me to, I think I had a refutation on this, and it's Mark 12, verse 31, and then I think the refutation is on page, I think 15? Oh, no, it's on 19, sorry. And that is when, sorry, I'm trying to get there. So Jesus commands, he says, the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. And so your question, sorry, was that why can we not have an agape love for ourselves? Okay, so because of this exactly, I think that if you look back in Genesis chapter 3, which was the fall of man, that separated God from man. And so man took on flesh and sin entered the world. And so I think that when he's saying this, like love your neighbor as yourself, he used it as something that because our nature now is to love ourselves, we should then, because that love is so great, I think we do, like that's the mistake, like we do have that, or we try to have that agape love for ourselves, and that's when it becomes dangerous. So that's exactly why he commanded this, because we already do have that, we need to take that and transfer that love to someone else, because it is, I think, very dangerous to have that agape love for yourself.
was hoping to transition to a life of service. Are we ready to go there?
Sure.
Okay. It sounds like Augustine had it right in the way he went about that. He started had a flawed upbringing, and then he found the light and then changed his ways. And I'm wondering how is that accessible to all of us? Are we all able to sort of have that moment where we turn towards that life of salvation?
Wait, so like the transition from like living a life of sin for yourself and transferring it to the life you ended up?
Pretty much like Augustine did.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's why I titled my paper, the Key to Universal Prosperity, because I think like in the beginning and in my speech, I compared this to a path. And obviously it's a very narrow path and it's not like a super popular path, but I think absolutely as long as you, so the path isn't easy, obviously, and I think that as long as you are willing to, want to walk that path for, happiness, for fulfillment, for the sake of, fulfillment. Augustine talks about like super and like heavily emphasized fulfillment and being at peace with that, and until feeling outcasted and horrible till he chose to instead of walking the path of self, walk the path of towards joy and the everlasting.
How do we know we're on that path, or how can we? So, sorry.
No.
Yeah, how do I know I'm on that path, or how do I know that I'm not on that path?
So again, I think it's a thing that like actions speak louder than words, and I think that like in past experience, it feels like not good when you're only like me, taking for me, and especially when like in a darker mindset, I think the only escape is like truly like again like transferring that love. I think it's a daily battle. Like fighting against your own flesh and really taking that and like pushing it towards loving others. Did I answer that?
Potentially. I think I'm going to ask the same question, but like more directly towards what you brought up. And how do I know the daily battle is a good one? Like maybe the thing that I'm doing is not getting enough sleep because I'm trying to give students thorough responses on their math homework so they are on the way to salvation. So I'm servicing my students,
Right.
but at my own expense. Is that a good fight? And how do I know that?
Okay, so Seneca talks about that when he's writing the letter to his friend. I think I talk about it on 17 possibly, but he writes the letter to his friend who's a public servant who's serving and telling him like, look, you're gonna run out of time, you're not gonna live your life well, and all this if you're not taking time for yourself and for philosophy. And so then, I don't know, I would then ask the question, like, can doing good, can loving others be that, feeling? Like, I don't think it has to be, like, an either or, like, at your own expense. I think that serving others can be, like, your livelihood and that source of happiness, running towards the path leading to joy.
Speaking of that, can we back up just a teeny bit, because I would be curious of how you would define joy, because that word sometimes people use it in different ways, to be love, to be happiness. I just so that I can follow where you're going, because you are using all three of those words.
Yeah.
I kind of want to feel your definition, see what your definition is.
So I think, again, like the spiritual and temporal, I think that's like happiness and joy. So I think that happiness is something you feel. It's a mood. Happiness is a mood, and joy is the fruit. So it's like, you're running along the path. There's joy. You can see joy. You can find joy, and it's until you make that transfer. I don't believe necessarily that joy is attainable in this life, but I think happiness is. Like, you can feel happiness. You can feel, like scientifically speaking, like endorphins. Like that's happiness. But joy, I think, is more spiritual and more like end goal sort of thing.
So you brought up endorphins because you know I'm a biology teacher. Alright, no, that's clear for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Forbes, if I pursue the path of joy, am I engaging in an act of self-love? If I have the goal or the end in sight of attaining joy at some point or attaining happiness, is that ultimately an act of self-love, of wanting that for myself?
I don't think so. I think that's more of, I think what needs to be differentiated then is like the flesh from the soul. And so I think that, when God commanded that, again, like your temple, to take special care. And so I think that, what would be the point if not to, strive to work for the ultimate good and at the end being rewarded with joy. And really cultivating, I talk about a lot, like cultivating the fruits and planting seeds found in things that are spiritual and that are good versus temporary and physical that will fizzle out. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
So, I'm curious then, from your books, some of your readings and things that you wrote out, some of the characters in there, like Victor Frankenstein,
Mm-hmm.
right? Did he have self-love? Did he love himself?
Absolutely. And I talk about, I think that's why I love Frankenstein so much, because you get to experience both. Like, I think that Frankenstein had the opportunity to not love himself, but instead he chose to focus and fixate at the beginning, only on the creation of the monster, which then, created the monster. And I think the monster is, that almost perfect representation of, only knowing how to love yourself.
So like Claro and, they were really, I feel that he said he loved him at some point and cared for him, but is that more of that friendly love and not this agape love in that sense?
Yeah, and I also think along with that, like, love is service, and I really didn't see Frankenstein serving anybody but himself, like, constantly, and that drove him mad, and then ruined the creature, and it was a destruction of both of them, ultimately.
I'm wondering, how should we interpret then Victor's lamenting his destiny, lamenting who he is and his passions, the things that have inspired him to do the things that he did? If he is someone who loves himself, why does he constantly describe himself in equal terms?
Because I think that shows, like, exactly what loving yourself does to you. Because I don't think love was meant for, just yourself. And that's why, like, the emphasis is on loving and serving other people. And out of that, finding joy and finding contentment because of that. And so I think he was miserable and he knew it, but he refused to do anything but that. And so, like kind of, you see it in Crime and Punishment, like Raskolnikov, like, he goes insane because, like, he killed 2 people because he wanted to, because, So.
So why do they go in that direction?
That's when on page 4, that's when I introduced the disease of selfishness, and I think that's exactly what it is. Like, it's a disease that infects and permeates and kills. Like, when you keep feeding it and keep feeding it, it grows and grows until, it's all over.
Yeah, that's great, and I really, really love that metaphor that you've developed there, the disease of selfishness. And I'm wondering if we can stretch that just a little bit further. How does one contract this disease? And then maybe based off of that answer, we can figure out how to immunize ourselves.
I think that is that transition that Augustine, it was, perfect. That's why I chose Augustine as my third book, because it was that perfect transition from living a life of, only serving himself and, walking on the path of material possessions and lust and, that motivating his livelihood, or at least what he thought, to transitioning that to seeking an identity, like placing his identity from things that consistently failed him, like, money is going to fail, until he made that transition to focus on his relationship with God and cultivating those fruits and cultivating those things and that relationship in the spiritual, which does not fizzle and is not material.
Yeah, I think that sounds exactly right for Augustine. I'm thinking now of Frankenstein's creation, right? What happens to him? How does he contract this disease?
I think from the very beginning, which is why I enjoy, it sounds bad, like I enjoy the book because you get to see what happens when, it's a relationship of like self-service and self-love. And I feel bad for him because, he never really was taught and never really had the chance to learn otherwise. And so, it's that continuous feeding of that, disease and letting it flourish and permeate your soul.
So, do you have to receive agape first? Or receive that love from someone else first to really understand how to give it? To have that sort of life of service, as you say? Do you have to actually receive it first to really understand it? Or is this something that's innate that you just have to, that everyone can do?
So in my experience, this is when I talked about John and Jesus' life, an example. Like, when Jesus came to die, when God sent Jesus to come and die and pay, perfectly innocent being, I think that is the embodiment of agape love. So in my experience, yes, it was, Jesus teaching me his example, from that example stemming what agape love is. Therefore, like, being the motivator for the reason why behind, like, the why behind loving.
So Victor Frankenstein's monster never experienced any of that, so there was no way for him to even. Was there any way that he could have reached that point at all?
Like,
or was he just doomed from existence?
Like, hypothetically?
Yeah, like hypothetically.
Oh.
That's okay.
I mean, yeah, I think that if the monster was somehow able to find somebody like Raskolnikov found Sonia, and that relationship, like a relationship like that was made like a purposeful, like steering in the direction like, hey, then I think people are naturally inclined to, follow the light, I guess, and respond in that way, So yeah, I think that if he did have a Sonia, then it could have been possible.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Just finish.
No, you're good. I had my your turn now.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering then. So then is dependent upon other people. Right? One's own salvation.
What can you expand on what salvation you're?
Yeah, I was just wondering, this achieving the path of joy or arriving upon the path of joy is dependent upon, for Raskolnikov, it was dependent upon Sonia. Perhaps, I mean, I guess maybe I'm wondering if she had not been there, would he have been able to get on that path?
So hypothetically, I think that no, people are not, because people are, materialistic. I guess they're finite. And not. I think what we need to look for is that transition of being transcendent, and finding, seeking that identity in that level. And so I think that it's not up to humans and it's not up to the flesh. I think it's like seeds. I talked about it. I don't know where in my paper, but again, it's like planting seeds. And it's up to something, which is God, that I talked about in my paper, that is planting that seed. And, I think he can use humans as vessels to plant that seed, but it's ultimately up to him to allow those to grow and put that passion within one. So not human at all.
So what if you stray away from this, but then come back? Like you stray away from this life of service, or on that path of joy, as you're saying, for a little while, but you stray back. Can you make up for the time missed? Is it an end to a means, or is it the entire journey that is important, or an average or something of that aspect in that path? I'm just curious if, because we're human, right? We make mistakes, we stray away from things, we're imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious how that path works. If it's okay to stray away if you find the path again.
I think that it's like when the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, comes into hand. And I think that, again, that's why, this path is so narrow, and it's ultimately a choice, which heightens the want and the need to choose well. So I think that straying could ultimately teach you, and we mess up, we're imperfect beings. And I think that making those choices teaches you, for next time. It's like a thorn, it's like bugging you, and to fix it, so ultimately next time, you're better off. And I think it's okay to make mistakes, as long as you're redirecting yourself back onto that path.
How do you know that you've made those mistakes? How do you know how to redirect yourself back on that path?
I think you know the mistakes because, you feel it ultimately. Again, I think I wrote a little bit, I guess, about Frankenstein, his misery. He was miserable. For all we know, ended off or finished his life in misery. So I think that it's a state of constant misery until you're repentant and go back onto that path of cultivating those fruits again. And then, did you ask a second question? Sorry.
I might have, but I totally forgot. So.
Okay.
What about Seneca? He seems to be very content, as if he's found his happiness in philosophy, in serving himself. Is he right? How is he going to learn?
No, that's why Seneca is so tricky, because I feel like he gets so close to the point, and then he talks about it in his writings, and then he's just woo, and goes the other direction. It's whoa. So I think that, I don't know, I had a huge problem, which is why I enjoyed picking his essay when he was writing to his friend, because he's almost like rebuking him for like serving other people, and I don't know, that just really bugged me, like him being bugged for his friend serving other people. I don't know, I feel like that might just show like there's something like in there that's like picking at him, causing him to be like, that's wrong, if that makes sense.
So I think what I'm hearing is we know that Seneca is flawed because he's rebuking the idea that his friend should be servicing others. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Because I don't see a problem with serving. And, you know, his friend being a public servant and, like, that being his livelihood. You know what I mean? If we look at St. Francis of Assisi, you know, he started out like the son of a rich Italian merchant, and then when he decided to walk on this narrow path, the path of service and loving others, his father gave him the either or. Like, you choose this, you're wealthy, you have everything set for you, or you're being disowned. And he ultimately chose to be disowned for the sake of being able to love other people as Christ has loved us and commanded us to do. So it's again like choosing to harvest the fruit.
Sorry.
No, you're good. No, just to choose to
No,
harvest
I
the
was-
fruits of the spiritual and not into the basket of temporary things that are not going to last.
So service, right? I'm curious what you define as service, because I'll get to the questions. Like, so for example, I was in the Peace Corps. I did that for 3 years, working in a very small community, poor community, helping them with making sure that they had fresh water and improve their livelihoods and things of that sort. But is service, are there multiple definitions of what service is, or is it really just the act of loving others? Or is that just the umbrella over the whole definition of it? There's many little sort of points in that umbrella that can be defined as service, but they all fit under something about, you know, loving others.
Can you specify a little more?
I think I had a similar question, but and my phrasing was, is there a wrong way to serve?
Okay, sure, yeah.
Like serve others?
Yes.
Yes, serve others.
So I would then ask what the motivator is, because I think it is dangerous, and I think you would tend to get drained if your motivator was yourself. If that makes sense? And satisfying that, like, oh, I'm doing good still, so it's still good, but
So
it's the underlying reason for why you're doing that. And I think it's dangerous if you're doing it to satisfy your flesh and not out of thanksgiving and appreciation for the life that you have.
okay, yeah, that definition is clear to me.
Ms. Forbes, is it possible to serve others and yourself at once?
Yes, because I think that again, I'm referring to, Sonia, Mother Teresa, and St. Francis. I think that they were, again, cultivating those fruits for the spiritual while serving and loving other people. So I think it's a dual thing, but it's using love in two different ways while you're serving, if that makes sense.
So what attitudes should we hold towards ourselves then? So if we are serving others out of love, do we serve ourselves out of what should we feel towards ourselves?
Like I stated earlier, more emphasis on appreciation and I guess contentment for what you have been given and living in thanksgiving for what God has given you, and then out of that thanksgiving using that love in order to give thanksgiving to God.
give you a chance for maybe one more question before we open it up to the audience.
I gotta look at my list right now. The computer went blank. So I'm also curious if there's because you said it's okay to love others. Well, no, maybe not. I'm wondering if there's a sequential order to this. Is what if I am wanting to seek joy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is there a very specific path that I can take? Do I need to learn about something first before I move to the next step? I mean, are there very specific steps to take, or is this just sort of a lifelong path and experience that you have to mold and meld everything together to reach that point?
I think it's the latter, like you said. I don't necessarily believe that joy is attainable in this life. I think it's the reward for seeking out fruits and seeking out things and cultivating things that are founded in the spiritual rather than the temporal.
Okay.
So like that's differentiating again, like happiness and joy. So I think joy is like there, you know, and you can look to joy like while you're walking along this path, but that's like your motivator behind it. If that makes sense, like that's your reward, but did not mean to say motivator. Your motivator is, you know, that living that Thanksgiving for your Creator by loving other people.
All right, thank you very much. Let's open it up to the audience. Audience members, if you have a question you would like Grace to answer, please type it into the chat. Grace, you can choose the question you would like to answer. I recommend reading it and then answering it to the group.
Okay. Oh no. Do I have to read the first part of it? No, okay. I love you too, Sarah. Okay, Sarah asked, I was just kind of wondering if a person can show a love like agape without experiencing God's love. So, I think it could be possible to maybe mimic it, but I think that it is God's love, as I talked about in my paper, not specifically where, but when I brought in John, just in sending Jesus. I think, like I said, like that being the embodiment of agape love. You're thinking about MLK's definition where agape love is a general goodwill for men. Okay, in that case, yeah, I could see that it could be, like I said, like a mimic, but I think that it is, like agape is what God's love is for us. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, Bryn. So, if people are finite and materialistic, like you said, how can I walk a path of service or live a life of service while keeping manipulation and mistreatment of unconditional kindness at bay? What do you mean? I don't know, I'm confused by your question. What do you mean by that?
Miss Hager, I think it would be a good idea to unmute yourself.
Okay, so basically what I'm trying to ask is, when you're like really nice, a lot of people think it's just like probably people take advantage of that and they'll try to and actually like they'll live it with the life is with that.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I don't even know what that was. I'm so sorry, everybody.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. Bryn, I did not hear anything you said again. I'm so sorry.
Do you want me to re-say it?
Yes.
Okay. So, basically what I was asking was, if people are finite and materialistic, like you said, how can I walk the path of service and live a life of service and, like, unconditional kindness and live like Christ, without people trying to, like, manipulate and misuse that, like, kindness? Because that's just, like, what happens in life, and unfortunately that's the way people are. Or do you just deal with it, or, like, how do you protect yourself from that?
So you're talking about, like, at, like, an end goal being, you know, that, like, happiness and joy?
Like, basically what I'm saying is, like, how do you protect your own happiness and your own, like, worth without just, like, without just being there to, like, serve everyone else? Like, how do you serve yourself, I guess, kind of?
Okay, I'm gonna answer it with how I think you're asking, but I think that has to do with where you find your identity and why it's important for that motivating factor to feed your soul by placing your identity and finding your identity in things that are spiritual rather than temporal. Because I think if you try to make everybody happy, you know, again, like you said, like, that's the flesh, like, that's temporary. So I think if you differentiating, looking at the soul versus, like, the flesh and finding your identity in Christ's love, which is that agape love, and letting that fuel you instead of, you know, happiness. So having joy be that end goal versus just, like, happiness, if that makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. Ireland, thank you. What is the difference between helping people get to salvation versus a true friendship? So, do you mean, like, I think those can go hand in hand, like helping people arrive at salvation by being their friend, which is, you know, that relationship of philia. Yeah, it's that the relationship between equals. I could get into disagreeing with Aristotle a lot. Yeah, I don't really appreciate him. Stephen asked, you seem to say that agape achieves the highest good, a spiritual good for man. Do we then love ourselves by participating agape? That is the life of service? No, I do not think so. I think, again, like, that is that differentiating. I think agape is almost a sort of weapon, and I think that when we turn, like, that weapon towards ourselves and put that emphasis of love towards ourselves, like, that's where we get trapped. So I don't think it's love. Again, like, I want to put the emphasis on, like, appreciation and having a more philia love, like a more friendship love, and not, like, the highest, most radical spiritual love for ourselves. David Moore asks, is there a conflict between exercising agape love and fulfilling personal ambition? Yeah. So I think that's the danger of, I talk about identity and Frankenstein and Raskolnikov and Crime and Punishment, but I think that when the motivating factor is your own satisfaction, your own happiness, and doing the good for your sake instead of channeling the love, having agape love and channeling that for being your motivator. I think that's that conflict, the physical versus the infinite. Hopefully that answered your question. Sorry, there's so many. There's a saying that no one can fill from an empty vessel. What if in order to serve, I need to tune myself while doing that? If I'm feeling that way, do I need to reassess? Yes. So I think that, again, identity is the whole, makes all of the difference in that case, and finding your identity in, like, man versus finding your identity in Christ and things that are spiritual. So I think that will allow you to reassess, if that makes sense. Like once you get to that point of, I think that's when you're feeling like, oh, self-serving, instead of using love in the right way, if that makes sense. Alana, thank you. Can serving others be a selfish act? Yes. I think these are super similar. Again, I think if it's for like yourself and like, oh, I'm doing this to fill my cup, and not for, the attainment of joy and living in Thanksgiving for your Creator, I think that yes, it can be more of a selfish because you're not doing it for the ultimate good. Brothers K. He's so sick and run down. Oh, I'm supposed to be reading these out loud. I'm so sorry. In Brothers K, there's a monk Zazama, and he's so sick and run down, but he continues to go out to others and serve them. Is there a point when they're serving too much and they're so sick? Should they continue serving others? Is there a point when someone is serving others too much? So, in assessing the life of Mother Teresa, she did at times, she dealt with a lot of depression. I mean, how could you not, seeing others suffering so much. And so I think, again, it's reassessing, like I said earlier, and not letting the motivation, your motivator, really fuel that. So I think, again, if you're serving for the sake of the flesh, then yeah, that's going to really empty you and deplete you versus serving for the attainment and the spiritual. You mentioned that joy and happiness are two different things. I understand your definition of happiness, but how would you describe joy? Joy is the end, I guess, goal that you want to attain. So while you're walking along this path, joy is that light, and you can glimpse at the light, but that's your reward for living the life of service. If that made sense, hopefully. Another question, Ireland. If someone has suffered some kind of trauma and doesn't love themselves, how should one achieve salvation? Is she allowed to unmute herself? Because I'm a little bit confused by that.
Yes, Ireland, please unmute yourself.
Well, I was reading how people suffer from depression or people in their childhood haven't anything themselves. I was wondering how one should achieve salvation. And does depression?
Yes. Okay, I think I understand now. I think that the cure to depression would be taking that love. So again, like I talked about Mother Teresa, she did deal with depression, and it is, a real valid thing. And I think it's until, again, you seek out, you allow agape love to fuel that seeking of joy and the attainment of that. Hopefully, I don't know if that answered that. I'm so sorry, my head is if we can love God because God first loved us, why do you think Frankenstein was doomed from the beginning? Why would he need a love interest to know love? Frankenstein or the monster? Because the monster, I think that experience, nothing can come from nothing. So I think that you do need to experience love to know love. So doomed from the beginning because he never had the chance and never got to experience love and have an exemplary being for that motivation. Augustine spent a long time in his life coming to the Catholic faith, spending much of his time in, I don't even know how to pronounce that, oh my gosh, Machianism, is that right? Machianism? He seemed to use reason and experience to ultimately come to a point of joy in his life. That is the point of confessions, it seems to me. I would disagree that joy is unattainable in this life, but either way, how does reason play a role in turning away from the life of simple pleasures? Is there a method for living for joy? Uncle Doug. Oh, thank you, Uncle Doug. Wow, that's a lot. So I think, sorry, but I disagree with you. I think that joy is all the more reason, joy received from God is all the more reason. That's why it's not attainable in this life, and I think that is the reward for going along this path and living this life of love and service. And so you talked about reason playing a role in turning away. So reason being human reason, I think that it's again like talking about the seeds planted, and I think it's not up to us and our understanding, but God planting that seed and cultivating that reason. Hopefully that makes sense. Should government exercise agape love when dealing with other nations? Or should the exercise of agape love be left to individual citizens? So I think if agape love is exercised by individual citizens, that would mean that the government would exercise agape love in dealing with other nations. So I do think this is a whole nother thing, but justice would play into that. But I think if agape love is the foundation for dealing with world problems, I think that a lot of things would be very, very different. Thank you, Brady. Thank you. If you have no interest in showing love to others, do you still have joy and happiness? So I think, again, like referring to biology, I don't think, so again, I'm going to emphasize like joy not being attainable in this life. I think that joy is that reward and that at the end of this path. So in referring to biology, I think that, yeah, you can be, yes, like happy because it's science. Like you do have endorphins, you do feel happy. So I think that you can be happy, but I don't know if you're joyful in that sense.
Thank you, audience, for being active participants. I know we've run a little bit over, but I do want to give the family one last question if they have it. So, Forbes family, feel free to unmute yourself. You can turn on your camera if you like. And the last question for Grace is yours.
Oh, that was sweet. Thoughtful.
Do you have a question? You don't have any question? No, you don't?
So,
Just say it loud. So if what?
So, if joy is unattainable in this life, and we're to be motivated by joy, then what is the definition of joy ultimately?
So my dad just asked if joy is the motivator for this life, and we're supposed, what did you say?
So if joy is unattainable
in this life, and we're supposed to use joy as the motivator, then what is joy? Oh boy. So, joy. So again, like differentiating happiness and joy. Happiness is the mood, and joy is the fruit. So again, like that seed planted, growing into a fruit, but the fruit like attained in overall, like at the end. reward, and reward is that fruit of joy, being the culmination of, you know, that agape love geared towards others.
Would you say that that's living as you were created to live, then?
What, agape love?
Joy. Finding joy, would it be living as you were created to live, or would it be something else?
He asked if finding joy would be living as we were created to live. So, again, in looking at Genesis, I think that if that was what the relationship of God and man was to look like, it would be in harmony with God. So, yes, because joy isn't the thing that's found in the physical, it's found at the end in that reward in the spiritual. So, yeah, which is more emphasis on using that to fuel, that reward to fuel this agape love for the sake of the universal fulfillment
And prosperity.
and prosperity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Forbes. You made it. I invite the audience to unmute yourselves. You can even turn on your cameras to congratulate Ms. Forbes.
Good job, Grace.
Thank you. Woohoo! Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm reading all your thank you, Brady. Thank you, Ayla. Thank you, Miss Chen. Thank you, Miss Church. Oh, thank you, Utterly. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Hensley.
Great job, Grace.